we're going to record this session. So this is Teaching Sensitive Topics to Students Learning Remotely. I'm Robin Attas from the Center for Teaching and Learning. I'm joined by Sue Festadi-Young, the director of the center. We are going to walk you through a number of different issues and kind of conversation starters, strategies around this topic. Before getting into anything in depth, just in case, a few points about Teams. If you are new to Teams, or haven't used it in a while, that this menu bar that floats up on the bottom of your screen has a number of useful features, including the ability to turn off your video, especially if your internet starts slowing down on you, muting your microphone when you're not speaking, raising your hand to speak, and then expanding the chat feed as well. So just know that those things are all available to you, as well with the 3 dots. If you click on that, you can get auto captioning turned on. It's not the greatest, but it is something. So if that's something that you would like to access, that's with the 3 dots. In terms of our plan for today, we are going to start with some opening remarks from Sue, and then I will give a 10-minute-ish overview of various considerations and strategies around this topic. Kind of setting the stage, as it were, but then the remainder of the session is really meant to be for open discussion, questions, comments. So I'll moderate that as it comes through to that time. But this kind of gives you a sense of what we're doing with our time in the next hour. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Sue.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm really glad to see as many of you here as there are here. As we get started, I would like us to acknowledge the lands that we're on, the traditional and unceded territories of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of place, of history, and of gratitude. I think that it grounds me in ways that increase about the purpose, the community, and the sharing that we're about to do. And in terms of gratitude, I am grateful for sunshine. I had sunshine, it's gone, but it's coming back. I can see it. Fall is one of my favorite months. I like change. I like crispness. And I like feeling grateful for being able to enjoy that crispness. I'd like you to join me in just taking a moment to acknowledge your place right now, and any gratitude that you might feel in being able to share this space that we're on. So, welcome in gratitude. Today's session, I think, is all about mindfulness. We're going to be spending some time talking about guiding principles, essentially, that are meant to provide a framework for practice, regardless of the context that we find ourselves in. I think that in our move to remote teaching, we may be focusing a lot on the medium rather than on the principles that guide our practice. So some of the principles that we're going to be talking about today are related to teaching, but they're also related to learning in ways of helping our students feel safe in an environment that at times might be very challenging for them. So we'll try to point out the principles as they arise and make sure that you're comfortable knowing how those principles are adapted to alternative contexts that you may find yourself and your students in. And with that, I think I'm going to stop and hand things over to Robin to get us started in thinking about some of the things that have arisen over the past several months.
Thanks so much, Sue. So as I was researching and putting together this webinar, it became apparent that this is a really challenging topic and there's a lot of moving parts. And so in the end, what I decided to do, which is typical for me in my academic roles, but not so much in my webinar and facilitator roles, is to actually prepare a text and read that text. So that's what I'm going to do now. Of course, there are slides as well. But if after the session, if anyone's interested in just having that as a document, I'm happy to circulate it. We'll probably send it out along with the recording after the session. But just so you're aware that I am reading from a screen, which is, takes me back to my music theory roots in terms of what I'm supposed to do when I'm presenting to other people. Anyways, so many things have changed as a result of the shift to remote teaching during the COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of teaching and learning, both instructors and students have had to learn so much so quickly. New challenges are arising as a result of the online and remote environment, but what we're finding in the CTL is that the same evidence-based strategies for good teaching that we used pre-pandemic can help us overcome these challenges. We know that students are learning from a variety of environments now, whether in dorm rooms or off-campus housing in Kingston, coffee shops or parking lots on open Wi-Fi connections, and in family homes with or without dedicated study spaces. Students are both within and outside Canada. The Queen's University International Centre estimates that at least 2,000 international students are currently learning from abroad, mostly located in China and India, but in a number of other countries as well. Media outlets and many Canadian university statements have focused specifically on students learning from China as a point of concern. But in reality, no Queen's student is in a typical learning environment this year. And that has real implications for everyone's education in a number of ways. So this session will focus specifically on questions around teaching sensitive or controversial topics. Again, a concern raised with students learning from China, but with broader implications for all learners taking Queen's courses. And this talk has two parts: an overview of the various considerations instructors teaching sensitive topics might want to contemplate, and a deeper dive into specific strategies for teaching sensitive topics that work in any kind of teaching situation. And a reminder that these are not official statements from Queen's University or from the Centre for Teaching and Learning, but instead evidence-based suggestions for things that instructors might choose to do. And I know also that we have a diverse audience here in terms of some people who are instructors themselves, some people who work with instructors in different capacities, some people who are administrative roles that intersect with instructors. So you'll notice in my speech as it is, there's a bit of back and forth in terms of who I'm addressing. So find yourself within that as best you can. So first, let's talk about considerations. Most of the concerns I've heard from instructors and the media are focused on course content that might be sensitive, controversial, or even illegal in other countries. I've heard mention of broad topics such as freedom of speech, human rights, gender and sexuality, and religion, among others, as well as specific topics such as the ongoing protests in Hong Kong. I appreciate that instructors are thinking proactively about these topics and how to address them with students, but I also want to emphasize that at least as far as I've heard, which certainly isn't the entirety of campus, students learning remotely have not directly expressed concerns over course content thus far. Campus units are reporting international student difficulties with course access, for instance, to platforms such as OnQ, Microsoft Teams, and Zoom, and to course materials, including textbooks, videos, and so on. Students are struggling with synchronous or live sessions being offered at times that are the middle of the night in their time zone, and with living immersed in one language and learning in another. Reporting general technical difficulties relating to slow internet connection speeds, either because of the students' access to the internet or use of a VPN. This suggests that some of the best practices for remote teaching that have been shared repeatedly by educational support professionals across campus should continue to guide instructor practices. Things like emphasizing asynchronous activities over synchronous ones, recording synchronous sessions and offering them at multiple times, and offering low bandwidth equivalents to video course content, such as text documents or infographics. Instructors should continue to encourage students to seek technical support through IT services and should carefully consider what educational technology they incorporate in their course with the help of department, faculty, and campus-wide professionals. Course content decisions have multiple additional considerations. One is instructors' right to academic freedom and individual choice in what they teach. Collective agreements for CUFA and PSAC 901 members enshrine the fact that it is up to individual instructors to decide what they want to do in their courses and tutorials. Another relates to concerns around surveillance of both students and instructors. In the media, this has often been linked explicitly to Chinese government surveillance, but here I want to encourage some caution and push back a bit against what for me sometimes looks like racism. There are all kinds of opportunities, particularly in an online environment, for surveillance by all kinds of individuals and organizations, both public and private, domestic and foreign. For instructors, general advice includes being aware of the implications of being linked online to teaching particular topics. For instance, will you be able to travel to Hong Kong one day if you teach about the Hong Kong protests? For students, instructors can remind them to be aware of the laws of their own country and the consequences of breaking them. Often, students know what they're getting into when they choose to study at a Canadian institution, but it doesn't hurt to remind them, especially in this strange new world of the pandemic, where no one knew what we were getting into, except maybe pandemic researchers. Instructors can also share strategies for creating privacy in student study spaces where possible, such as using headphones, finding locations that are more private for particular activities, and choosing to engage with particular content at times of day when others in the household may be less active. For some, this may raise the question of the degree to which instructors are obligated to care about student safety in the context of their course. I'm not a legal expert, so I won't speak to legal obligations or lack thereof, but I am a human being. And it seems to me a good practice that we as human beings should care about the impact of our choices on others. And course instructors are in a particular power dynamic with students that might suggest adopting a more rigorous ethical standard, whether something like the do no harm approach common to the medical and helping professions, actions from the ethics of care philosophy, or more specific to teaching and learning, something like the Society for Teaching and Learning in Higher Education's ethical principles in university teaching, which includes attention to teaching sensitive topics. Instructors might also consider how attention to this issue is related to principles of accessibility, inclusion, and universal design, which generally suggest that instructors attempt to meet the learning needs of as many students as possible to the greatest degree possible, while still staying true to the learning outcomes of the course. Treating this situation as another form of academic accommodation is, I think, a particularly fruitful strategy that I'll describe in more detail in the next section. So in terms of teaching strategies, I see two major instructional strategies to address here: how to teach sensitive topics and how to handle academic accommodations relating to course content. So first, let's talk about teaching sensitive topics. When it comes to teaching sensitive topics, we know that every topic is sensitive to someone. A content warning might help some, but it might trigger others or make them think that they should be triggered and therefore get them triggered. And there are lots of times when a seemingly straightforward topic can bring up unanticipated yet painful associations for someone. Regardless of whether instructors think they have controversial content or not, a key first step is creating and maintaining open lines of communication between instructors and students. Say it in the syllabus, say it in the first class, say it every week. If you have concerns, here's how to get in touch. Establish guidelines for classroom discussions earlier in the semester and stick to them. Build trust among learners by easing into more difficult discussions if possible, and by scaffolding the skills required. Instructors might start the semester by having students argue from their own experiences, then move them towards adopting different perspectives, and then bring it back to their own experience to integrate what they've learned. Instructors or TAs should regularly monitor the chat and online discussion forums for problematic content and deal with it both publicly and privately as soon as it occurs. Frameworks such as Diane J. Goodman's Straight A's approach are helpful here, and I'm happy to share that in more detail afterwards if anyone wishes. Finally, instructors should attend to student wellness, both in the moment by doing their best to observe learners in the virtual room, and throughout the course or unit by regularly sharing resources for students in case they need to talk to someone. Instructors don't need to be crisis counselors or experts on all services available, but they should be ready to help students find the supports they need as best they can. And we're certainly seeing in this year of remote learning that instructors are a real point of contact between students and the university, even more so than in a normal year. Student wellness services resources are somewhat limited right now depending on students' location. Clinical counselors are only able to serve students living in Ontario, and medical doctors are only able to serve students living in Canada. However, the Empower Me service is available for all students and has local access numbers and multiple language availability. And it's also covers more than just crisis counseling. It deals with things like diet, life management, finances, all sorts of things. Non-clinical student wellness programming is also an option. The second major strategy is to treat this as a special new type of academic accommodation or consideration. Instructors can deal with these requests on a case-by-case basis, or they can follow principles of universal design for learning when designing their courses so that requests are less likely to arise. For instance, instructors might offer greater student choice in assignment or content topics right from the start. For instance, saying, for this assignment, you can consider one of the following 3 examples of national human rights violations. Or they might prepare alternative assessments or course content as backups in case students raise concerns. For a universal design approach that's more proactive, returning to the learning outcomes for the course, unit, or assessment is critical to the decision-making process. There are certainly times when the learning of the course requires students to engage with specific content, and there's ample evidence to suggest that developing strategies to address sensitive, controversial, or difficult topics is an important part of a university education. From what I've gathered so far in my research, it's completely okay to continue teaching these topics to students learning remotely. But that said, if a course or assessment's learning outcomes are not directly tied to a particular topic, perhaps this is an opportunity to design a few alternatives into a course. Again, these choices are up to the instructor, but there are lots of good reasons why instructors might want to consider their choices carefully and with attention to accommodation and accessibility, not just now, but always. And I think that's the final message I want to share in this segment. As in so many areas of teaching and learning, this to me feels like a case where the best practices and evidence-based strategies for teaching in face-to-face settings still apply. There are some tweaks that are needed for remote learning, but in many cases, instructors already have the skills. They just need some help applying them in a new context. Perhaps we can take heart from the fact that we're in week 8 of the fall semester and nothing major has happened that I know of. We haven't all fallen to pieces. On the other hand, maybe the silence is an indication that there are things going wrong that students are too overwhelmed to even tell us about. Either way, thoughtful pedagogy and caring for each other as human beings can go a long way towards fostering deep and meaningful student learning, regardless of where it happens. So that concludes the official remarks, and I'm noticing Christine's about the specific framework, so I do have another slide on that. So this is one particular approach for dealing with a situation typically in the classroom, but I could see this working really well in an online environment as well. If you have noticed something maybe inappropriate, maybe a racist remark, a sexist remark, something coming up that a student has shared that you want to deal with, so she's got these 4 A's. The first one's affirm, which is to affirm and appreciate people's comments and questions. And that's not necessarily validating what they're saying, but it's affirming the fact that they spoke up. So it's kind of giving everyone the sense of, okay, it's okay to speak up. Thank you for your comments. It's as simple as that. The acknowledge piece has to do with acknowledging what people are saying. Make sure you understand what they're expressing and paraphrase words and feelings. So you might say, if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is, and then summarize in your own words. So you're really just trying to confirm here that you understand what the person has said and what their point of view might be. Ask is the next phase, and this is asking questions to understand individual behaviors or perspectives, but also to help them reflect on their views a little bit. So you might say, so what I'm hearing you say is that such and such, or when you say this, do you mean this? Or are you suggesting that there's a connection between this and that? So you're really asking questions, trying to probe deeper. And then add is the place for you to offer some additional information, whatever that looks like. So it might be some kind of historical, social, political context. an alternative explanation, maybe referring back to particular readings if this is tied to course readings or activities in some way. And really trying at this point, this is where you get to challenge misinformation, broaden perspectives, address differences in power and privilege, put issues in a larger context. So for me, for example, who identifies as a woman, I might decide that the ad piece is coming from my own experience, where I might say, oh, that's interesting. From my lived experience as a woman, I've found that actually for me, it's been different. So already, but you don't have to refer to yourself. It can just be as simple as the reading suggests this such and such, or there's actually a whole subfield of this discipline that suggests blah, 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 blah. So whatever you're adding there is the opportunity to kind of broaden the conversation. And I should say too that I've shared this in different contexts. Not everyone is always comfortable with the opportunity of taking action, but I would also suggest that it's really important to take action of some kind. That the worst thing that I've seen heard from students, I suppose, is when a problematic comment is made and it's never addressed by the instructor. So this is one particular strategy for addressing it. It's not the only strategy by any means, but I think the key thing is to address it in some way so that it's noticed. So I think at this point, Caitlin, if you want to stop the recording, that's kind of the official prepared remarks section.